If anything's still bringing with their list, let's make that $70,000 a year.
I will call the
Okay.
Pittsylvania
Just
County Board of Supervisors regular meeting to order on November the 7th, 2016. General District Courtroom, Edwin R. Shields Courthouse Edition, 11 Bank Street, Chatham, Virginia. We'll have the roll call at this time, Mr. Mundy.
Mr. Barber.
Here.
Mr. Hagerman.
Here.
Mr. Blackstock.
Present.
Mr. Davis.
Present.
Mr. Scares.
Here.
Mr. Warren.
Present.
Mr. Barksdale.
Present. Thank you, Mr. Mundy. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, we will have a moment of silence. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're just going to do one little thing that, because we've got some special guests, I think. I see we have a troop with us, one Boy Scout and the others are Cub Scouts. I will ask you all to come forward and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you don't mind. Just come on up front. And ladies and gentlemen, stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Just face the flag, face the flag. And in the time you all just started for us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all very much for being here. We appreciate that very much. Do we have any items to add to the agenda? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve the agenda.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Davis, second by Mr. Blackstock. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your right hand. And it's unanimous. We're down to the hearing of citizens. When you come forward to make comments, we would appreciate that you speak into the microphone so that you can be heard. And just keep in mind that the citizens' comments, it's not a question and answer session with the Board of Supervisors. We only have one who signed up. That's Mr. Richard Shoemate.
Richard Shoemate from the Westover District. I'd like to have a word of prayer for us, please. Let us pray. Father, we come to you tonight to ask you to be with us at this meeting and go with each one of these board members. Sit beside them, our Father, and have them to vote as this county would have you to vote. And be with us as we go all through this meeting. Sit beside each one of us and have us to do the things we should. Be with all of us, but thank you for being able to live in your world. You provide the food, the air we breathe. Without you, we have nothing. These things we ask you in your name. Amen.
Amen.
I'd like to remind you today that I wish everybody in this county had been over to the meeting we had over here in the room. But I guess people just don't really care. But I really got an education. Some of it I've been listening at for about 15 years. The building out here at Blair's. I've been listening to that for a good 15, 16 years. I don't remember how many, but I know we gave it to somebody for $1 a year for several years and wasn't supposed to do any maintenance on it. But we spent $1 million several times putting a roof on it, doing all kind of work. Somebody said the floor was bad, so we had to go work on it. We spent several $1 million, and now we got a building over there that's about to fall down. I think I'd be afraid to walk in it from what I heard today. And I just hope that the board can see fit to do something with it. Like we're renting property now and renting a building, from what I can understand, for a library at Mount Herman. I don't know why we couldn't take this land, push the old building down. I know it's not just pushing the building down, it's quite a project to take down. All the stuff you have to go through to get it down, but we need to get the building down. We could build a library there and not pay this rent we're gonna pay for the rest of our life over at Mount Herman. We could build our own building there. Also, the building would be there beside the school. We'd be there right beside the school with the library. If we ever decide to build another school, that could come in the future. I just hope that you'll consider some of this when we're doing things. And I know it don't happen all at one time. The only other thing I'd like to say before I sit down, he's done turned the red light on. I read in the paper that we're gonna buy 14 school buses, new ones, additional school buses. I'm wondering who's gonna drive them. I've got a lot of friends drive school buses, and they cannot get enough school bus drivers. And I wouldn't drive one of them for $500 a day, from what I hear, the way they cut up and carry on the school buses. But I wonder what we're gonna do with the school buses. I see 3 a day, 3 in the morning, 3 in the evening, past my house, and I don't see anybody on them. I know they've been on there, but they don't have very few. So let's look at these things before we start spending all the money. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shoemate. I forgot to mention that the troop that's with us this evening is Troop 356 from Roseville. So thank you all again for being here. We're down to the consent agenda on the agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
Mr. Chairman, make a motion, we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Barber and second by Mr. Hagerman. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your right hand, and it's unanimous. New business is next, item 7. Mr. Mundy?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, what we do is typically quarterly, the finance director comes to the board and gives a year-to-date financial report. And then, of course, we're getting ready to go into budget season soon, so no further ado, we ask Ms. Vanderhyde to provide you with this quarterly update. And if you have any questions, staff will be happy to address any of those.
Good evening, Ms. Vanderhyde.
Good evening, Chairman Barksdale and members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to share highlights of the first quarter financial report with you this evening. The report is located in your board packet on pages 28 through 34, and I hope you've had a chance to look over that. As the report states, there's not a lot to report financially for the first quarter of 2016, since we have just completed our first billing for taxes that were due on June the 5th. There's not much that's taken place this quarter as far as revenue is concerned. I would like to note that we have received a total of $228,456 from tax and delinquent tax collections just for this first quarter in 2016. We have about $500,000 budgeted this year, so we're well on our way to meeting that budgeted figure. The chart on 34, I thought that was very helpful. Mr. Shorter was able to get that from tax. It actually shows an overall view of the collections from tax over the last year, and that's from October of last year till October the 12th is when they ran that report. The total received since last October totals over $1.6 million, and that's a combination of amounts that have been collected for personal property taxes, real estate taxes, and the solid waste household fee. It is important to note, too, that the Treasurer's Office has stepped up efforts to collect outstanding taxes and fees that are due the county. As noted in the report, they've stepped up efforts to enforce installment agreements and have put measures in place to prevent citizens from circumventing the DMV stop process. And Mr. Shorter is here tonight if you all should have any questions regarding revenue collections or his new procedural changes, but he's done great work in making strides in that area. As far as general fund expenditures are concerned, we have spent a total of 29% of our appropriated budget in comparison to 23% at the same time last year. And just as a matter of note, what I had to do is the landfill fund has now been eliminated since we're no longer collecting the solid waste household fee. So you won't see a section on landfill cost anymore because they're now just part of our general fund. So for comparison purposes, I added those expenditures from last year to the general fund so that we could see where we would be had the landfill been a part of the general fund last year. So with that, most of the increase in this year over last year was because our school carryover was considerably more than it was last year, and we've already transferred that money to the school system. So that's why that percentage is up by about 6%. In closing, there are several items to bear in mind as we enter this year's budget season. We have to evaluate the need for fund balance. This year, we used roughly $3.2 million to balance our 2017 budget. So we'll have to look at that and look at ways that we can maybe shave that down some. We are also able to use a new tool that's being provided to us through PFM, who are our financial advisors. They have partnered with a company called White Birch. They offer a software package that we won't have to pay for. It's already included in what we pay our financial advisors. And we're in the process of uploading information to them, and it'll be 5 years worth of expenditures and refunds in order for us to forecast where we need to be. And it's also a good tool that we can actually use when we're sitting in finance meetings and we may have, well, what would happen if this were to happen? And we can plug in figures. Hopefully that'll be working this year. This is brand new, so I'm working to get it there. We'll also be reviewing and updating our capital improvements plan. We send that out each year to our departments, and right now it is out to our department heads for their review, and that is due back to the finance office by Friday, November the 18th. And just in closing, I just wanted to add that we will be receiving our FY 2016 audit from Robinson Farmer Cox. I look for that in my email just any day now to finalize those figures for FY 16. And of course, that's really going to be helpful in gearing up for our budget season. We have to use all those pieces of the puzzle to make everything work together. So that is my report for first quarter. Do you all have any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Vanderhyde. Board, any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I just have one.
Mr. Warren?
Ms. Vanderhyde, I noticed on the revenue side, and I'm sure first quarter it's not a special thing, but the revenue collection was about a third in all categories except merchants capital.
Right.
I mean,
And what that
is that showing a trend since you compared it to last year, or is this just an anomaly?
It's really hard to compare in years, and that's why I wanted to make sure that you all know that Mr. Shorter he's doing things a little bit different than what had been done in the past. And so he's really ramping up how he's collecting. So he collected a lot before the close of the door on 2016. So when 2017 came in, and we haven't really had a billing since, it was due June the 5th. Actually, my taxes were in my mailbox when I got home today. So I'm sure yours will be too. And so, of course, second quarter is a much better quarter to be looking at those things.
So that's the point I was getting to. When we look at the difference of 3 or 4% here and there, it could be because they were collected prior to the deadline, so they wouldn't reflect in the first quarter because they were paid and never got to a delinquent status or whatever.
Right. The bills we sent out that were due June 5th, we completed processing all those payments June 21st of this year. So that fell before this quarter started. In comparison, last year, the payments that were mailed in that were considered current status were still being processed July the 14th. So a lot of those payments got processed over into the last year's first quarter.
Mr. Shorter.
Yes.
Hold just a minute. Any other questions or comments for Ms. Vanderhyde? Ms. Vanderhyde, we appreciate their report, and we're looking forward to the next. Thank you. Mr. Shorter, this is just a curiosity question. So could you give us an example of what might happen when people try to circumvent the DMV stop?
Sure. Our office, once taxes go into a default status, before they get sent out to collections, which for real estate, they have to be 3 years delinquent before we give up on our collection end and send them to collections, and 2 years for personal property. During that time, we work with the taxpayer and try to set up an installment agreement to pay for get these taxes paid before they go to a collection status. In the past, the office was allowing taxpayers to set up an installment agreement for personal property. They would come in and agree to pay their personal property taxes over a period of time. And by signing that agreement, the vehicle stop at the DMV was immediately released. And a lot of these people were not fulfilling their obligations on that contract. So they got what they wanted out of the deal by getting their DMV stop released, but they were not fulfilling their contractual obligations.
I see. Very good. Thank you, sir.
Yes,
Does
sir.
anybody else have anything? Mr. Shorter, we appreciate you being here this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Barksdale.
Thank you. Okay, expenditure refund for October 2016. I'll entertain a motion to approve the appropriation.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Barber, second by Mr. Warren,
10 days.
and there'll be a 10-day layover. Okay, thank you. Item number 8, recommendations from the Property and Building Committee. Mr. Mundy and/or Mr. Hagerman. Mr. Mundy, are you going to do it? Or Mr. Hagerman?
If it be the pleasure of the board, I don't mind.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
We're at the property, recommendations from the Property and Building Committee, but Mr.
you want Mr. Money to do it, Jerry? Yes.
Okay.
No, Mr.
Mr. Mundy?
Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the Building and Property Committee of the Board of Supervisors had a called meeting today at 5 p.m. and we met in the conference room. Staff provided 2 informational items to the committee. The first was the staff came to the board and brought to their attention that the chiller at the courthouse, this building here, is more than 40 years old. It's outlasted its useful life by far. And instead of waiting until it totally breaks down and we have to disrupt all the services in this building and spend more money, the staff recommended our approach to where we go ahead and get that under procurement at this time. So, Mr. Chairman, that particular item, the committee is this evening making a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to direct staff to follow the procurement policy to replace the courthouse chiller. And I'll stop here if you have any questions about that or if you want to get that matter out of the way before I discuss the second matter.
Okay, is there a motion?
You don't need one, he's from the committee.
Okay, are we ready to vote? All in favor, raise your right hand. And it's unanimous.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second matter that the staff talked to the Property and Building Committee about is the building known as the Blair's School. We call it the Blair's Community Center, has been used for about 12, 13 years or so for various recreational programs. The inside of the building has continued deteriorating because of the condition of the roof on the building. And this particular time, it serves a lot of our citizens for youth sports, including basketball and cheerleading. Usually kids around 6 or 7 years old up to early teenage years really use that building a lot. The staff talked to the committee about the continued deterioration of the building, and also to let the committee know that the staff continues evaluating options to relocate those recreational programs from inside the building to other facilities in the county. Staff does continue working on that, and we'll be talking to the board about what those concrete plans are as we get those developed. And the committee voted this evening to make a recommendation to the full Board of Supervisors to direct the staff to take necessary steps so that the building is closed to the public.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, raise your right hand. And it's unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Mundy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we're at item 9 on the agenda, open space agreement, and back to you, Mr. Mundy.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. The county has in place at the moment an open space agreement for the Cedars Country Club. This particular agreement expires December 31st, 2016. The organization still meets the program qualifications that is outlined in your board packet on page 51 through 55. This has been reviewed by the Commissioner of Revenue and the county attorney, and the staff recommends that the Board of Supervisors approve the open space land use renewal contract submitted by the Cedars Country Club, Inc., and authorize the county administrator to sign any necessary documentation. In other words, they still want to utilize the benefits of this program, and they do meet the eligibility requirements.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mundy. I'll entertain a motion.
Your district, or you wanna do it?
Item 9.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve the open space land use renewal contract submitted by Cedars Country Club Incorporated and authorize the county administrator to sign any necessary documentation.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Blackstock and second by Mr. Barber. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, raise your right hand. And it's unanimous.
Thank you.
Item 10 is next, lease agreement, Pittsylvania County Trustees of United Steelworkers Local Union, 9428. Mr. Mundy?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. A couple of meetings ago, this matter was brought to the Board of Supervisors, whereas a tenant was interested in leasing property owned by the county. The board had a duly advertised public hearing about the matter, and a draft lease was in your board packet between the county and the party that was interested in leasing that property. That party is the trustees of the United Steelworkers Local Union 9428. After reviewing the lease agreement, the board had some questions, a few matters they wanted addressed, and they directed the county attorney to continue fine-tuning those and bring back a lease agreement at a later time that addressed those points for the board's consideration. Mr. Hunt has done that, and he may want to talk to you about some of those revisions that were made on pages 57 through 62.
Okay, Mr. Hunt?
The two changes were made to address the Board of Supervisors' concerns to Section 5 and Section 6. Section 5 deals with utilities. Myself, Mr. Hawker, Mr. Taylor went out there and examined the property and examined the bills and met with the union representatives. And the previous lease had us paying all the utilities. This has them paying us $50 per month for the water and electricity use. They are leasing a very small portion of a large building, and they're only there one day per month for just a couple of hours. So Mr. Hawker did some calculations. He thinks $50 per month is more than adequate to protect our interests. We also inserted a clause that says after the first 12 months of this lease, we will re-examine the bills and we will true up and have the ability to fix this if this $50 is not adequate. The second item we changed is number 6. The last lease was somewhat vague about what insurance requirements the tenants needed to have. We inserted, we beefed this section much more up, and we inserted some hard numbers in here. The union representatives met at the end of last month. That's why there's been a delay getting this to you, and they have approved the changes, and they we present it to you for execution. Since we already had a public hearing on this, you can act on this at this meeting.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Okay, first of all, do I have any questions, Mr. Warren?
I don't have a question.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
I'd like to make a recommendation that we approve the lease agreement between Pittsylvania County and the trustees of the United Steel Workers Local Union 9428 and authorize the county administrator to sign any necessary documentation.
Second it.
Motion by Mr. Warren and a second by Mr. Davis. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Or we got a roll call?
Roll call.
Mr. Mundy?
Mr. Barber?
Yes.
Mr. Hagerman?
Yes.
Mr. Blackstock?
Yes.
Mr. Scares?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Warren?
Yes.
Mr. Barksdale?
Yes. We're at 11 on the agenda, memorandum of understanding, Pittsylvania County Department of Social Services. Mr. Mundy?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, it is time to renew the lease between the county and the Department of Social Services. And just to bring our citizens up to date on this, social services is a state function that is administered locally. And there are a lot of programs that our citizens utilize, and one of the requirements that the county has in its obligation to administer this program is to provide space for our Department of Social Services to operate. And as you know, there is a building out on McGee Drive, out in the Tight Squeeze community, here just a few miles down the road, where the Department of Social Services is co-located in one end of the building and the Health Department in the other end. The Department of Social Services occupies 61% of that building. The current lease that we're operating under has expired, and of course it's time to negotiate another lease. The county can charge a reasonable rent, and the word reasonable, one would think that that's more what a market base would establish. However, that's not the case. The state in the last few years, they have gotten very defined on what types of factors can go into what the county charges a Department of Social Services. We cannot take the building, the square footage it is, and look at the market rate that would be for a commercial property, and then charge that out, and then they start paying the bill. It doesn't really work that way. When we found out that this lease was expired, one of the first things that we did was we reached out to other localities that have been through this lately to make sure that we're figuring everything in the lease that we're entitled to receive. The bad news, or the good news, depending on the perspective that one has, the lease that we had before was very friendly to the county. And in that, the county was charging about $127,000 and some change, and we were getting that amount of rent back. And there's a revenue line item that's built into the county budget each year, and that helps offset, if you will, through the general fund, our direct costs of providing social services. However, with the tides turning now, and counties not being able to charge the same types of factors in our rent formula, we had to go with only what the state would allow us to receive. And in short, some of those things would be a depreciation base, and what we did on that was we took the cost of the building, depreciated that for about 40 years, which is allowable, and then there's like a straight line depreciation amount each year. We can charge that. We can also charge other things, fixed costs that we may have, and also variable costs for the maintenance of the building, snow removal, utilities, janitorial supplies, and so forth. All those are laid out in your board packet, pages 64 through 71. And again, the lease that just we outgrew was $127,000 in rent revenue. Now, in claiming everything that we can, that amount is considerably down, and that is outlined in the lease agreement on page 64. And you notice this amount going forward will go down to $47,669 annually, and that will be what is in the agreement in this particular MOU. And then there are also variable costs that we can recover, and they're on page 71 of your board packet. Things like gas, electric, water, sewer, and then the list is articulated in the board packet. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hunt has worked diligently in drawing up a reasonable agreement between the county and the state for this function that we have. He can speak to any terms or conditions or anything that he wants to share with you. I wish that we could shake more money out of the state, but based on everything that our research has indicated and the ones that I've negotiated in the past, that's about the best we could do. So once you're comfortable with a lease, The staff does recommend that the board approve the MOU between Pittsylvania County and the Department of Social Services and authorize a county administrator to sign any necessary documentation.
If I just jump in 2 seconds. I've been dealing with DSS for 14 years. This full template is provided by the state, and we've tweaked it. Basically, what it is we're allowed to charge 61% of our 4-year depreciation cost and the listed variable costs. So, while this number has gone down, this is with keeping what the DSS and the state is allowing now. So, I'm confident that this is, the best that we can do at this time.
I know, thank you, Mr. Hunt, thank you, Mr. Mundy. I assume that there's nothing in the equation that reference population or anything like that? Nothing? Nothing? Mr. Barber?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve this, agreement with social service as stated by the county administrator.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Barber, was that you, Mr. Davis? Second by Mr. Davis. Any further discussion? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I just have one question for clarity. On page 71, from variable cost side, you've got interest listed and pest control listed, water, sewage, electric, and gas. All the other items are covered on page 70. I'm assuming we're gonna monitor that monthly and bill for those?
We, Mr. Benner, we send them the monthly bills afterwards, and they pay the actual costs.
Okay, they pay it all even though they got 61% occupation?
61.
Okay. Now, the interest charged.
That's for the interest on, we're
The
still
debt.
paying for that building.
Okay.
It's the interest cost on the building, and it's
Okay.
61% as well.
Okay.
We do bill, the other portion to the health department. So the health department gets the other part of that. So we get 100% of the bill, we just get 61% for DSS.
Anything else, Mr. Warren?
No, Mr. Chairman,
Any
thank
other
you.
discussion?
I just like, in the past, how much was the rent we were drawing, 100?
127 and some change.
So we went from 127 down to 47.
Yes.
So it's just another way the state passed on more cost to the localities. Every meeting or two we get into this, they keep passing costs down to the localities. It just goes on and on and on.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Blackstock. Any-
Mr. Blackstock makes a really good point, because in this case, that works out to be about 66% that's being passed now to the county as opposed to the state. Be sure you get that.
Any other discussion? Okay, Mr. Mundy, Bruce, the roll call.
Yes, sir. If it make the board feel any better, the staff, we've really held this thing back for a couple of months to make sure that we could get everything out of the state that we could, especially since it went from 127 down to the amount that it is. Okay, Mr. Barber,
Yes.
Mr. Hagerman,
Yes.
Mr. Blackstock,
Yes.
Mr. Scarce,
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Warren,
Yes.
Mr. Barksdale.
Yes, thank you. Item 12 on the agenda, year 2017 Regional Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. Mr. Mundy.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, one of the things that the locality is required to do each year, before we go to the EDA, the Economic Development Administration at the federal level for any particular projects that they may have a funding opportunity available for, one of the things that we have to do is put it in what's called a CEDS list, a Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. And the West Piedmont Planning District Commission, they take the bull by the horns on this issue, and they come up with a regional list. They get input from the local governing body first, and they put it into a regional document. And the feds, they use that to help determine what projects have regional impact, which ones that they will or will not fund. So really an issue needs to be in the SADS project if we're going to go to the EDA for funding. And this particular year is pretty regular in that around the end of the calendar year, the West Piedmont Planning District Commission will ask for Pittsylvania County's portion of that list. And instead of coming to you on that particular evening and just say, we'd like for you to adopt this, we're coming to you a month early. And what Mr. Sides wants to do is talk a little bit about the process the staff will be going through, and we will leave you with this thought so that you can give us the input to make sure that our list is representative going forward. Mr. Sides?
All right, I think Mr. Mundy pretty much covered things, but just to emphasize that there is a committee that's formed by the West Piedmont Planning District Commission. It's includes representatives from all of the membership localities of West Piedmont. And the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy is a full document. What we typically come to you for is a project list, but keep in mind, it's a full document that lists all the assets and strategies and opportunities within the West Piedmont District. But a key part of that plan is the priority project list. Any project that needs federal funding needs to be on that list. As Mr. Mundy says, we're giving it to you at this point, just give you some time to look over it, give it some thought. What we've included in the packet tonight is the list that was submitted last year. We bring a project list back every year. It's changed in various ways over the years. About 2 to 3 years ago, I completely changed the list and updated it and added a lot of new projects. And we're probably due to take a good look now that we've got Mr. Rowe on board. Last time you guys acted on this, it was December, Mr. Rowe had just come with the county. So I intend to work with Mr. Rowe on this. On December the 5th, we'll come back to you. I hope that between now and the 5th, if you have any questions about something that either is on the list or question about why is something not on the list, contact Mr. Rowe or myself. We'll be glad to spend as much time as you want sitting down with you individually, a couple of members at a time, whatever it takes to work within the rules. But we want to make sure that you understand the list, and certainly by the end of December, we're able to vote and pass it on to the West Piedmont. So at this point, I'm sure you don't have any questions on specific projects, but if you'll collect your thoughts, we'll be glad to work with you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sides. Any comments or questions, Mr. Sides? Okay, thank you, Mr. Sides. Okay, moving on. That was no action taken. Item 13, the draft 2017 Board of Supervisors schedule meeting, reminding us that the new year is just right around the corner. Mr. Mundy?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. In the staff, just knowing that you all are busy, you mark your schedules up far in advance. Your organizational meeting is coming up here in 2 months or so. This is what the dates would look like on the calendar if the board sticks with its current methodology of meetings. The first Monday at 7 p.m., the third Tuesday at 7 p.m. We also built in there, you notice, in July, only one board meeting because it falls in the week of the 4th of July. If you went with the first Monday of July, we kind of moved Thanksgiving and/or Christmas around to make sure it's consistent with the way you've done it this year. Again, the staff is not recommending these dates. All we're doing is giving it to you on paper. In all respect to you, that you have time to think about that before you go to your organizational meeting and set your calendar soon.
Thank you, Mr. Mundy. Any comments, questions at this time? All right. Well, thank you for including that. That will be very helpful. Okay, we're down to appointments. Looks like we've got one for the IDA for the Dan River District. Mr. Davis?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Eddie Height was appointed by the Board of Supervisors of the Dan River District representative to the Pittsylvania County Industrial Development Authority for a 4-year term that would run from January 1st, 2013 through December the 31st, 2016. Mr. Height's term will be ending December 31st of this year. So he is eligible for reappointment for another 4-year term that will begin January the 1st, 2017 through December the 31st, 2020. Mr. Height has expressed interest in being reappointed. I have went and talked to Mr. Height face-to-face because I like to get a feel of people before I consider reappointing, and he has the same objects as far as I'm concerned of pushing the county forward, and I think he's an asset, so I make the motion that we reappoint Mr. Eddie Height to the IDA board.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Davis and a second by Mr. Warren. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your right hand. And it's unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Davis. I don't think we overlooked anything, so we're down to board announcements. And Mr. Warren, we're going to start with you, sir.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be very brief, but I do want to say a rounding thank you to you and the rest of the board members for a very, very productive day. It was truly we've been at it since 1 o'clock this afternoon, but I think it was very productive, and really enjoyed the unity and all we had throughout the day, and it was truly a pleasure. And Mr. Shoemate, I want to thank you for commenting about citizens coming out to those committee meetings, because you can learn a lot, and you get a lot more information sometimes from being there. Appreciate you being there today. And Mr. Shorter, I don't want to be remiss in thanking you for a job well done, and we appreciate your efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Mr. Davis?
You said it just about everything I needed to say. Mr. Short, I do appreciate the chart. I do appreciate what you've done. You did a good job. Ms. Vanderhyde as well. Thank you, Mr. Hunt, for what you've been doing. And I do appreciate this board for the continuity that most probably would not experience unless they did come, as Mr. Shoemate did today. But I'm thankful that we have a consensus on the board that we have continuity, as I said, expression, and we have an overall obligation to press the county forward. And I'm thankful that we're making some good decisions, and we're doing it with unity. And I think that has been lacking in the past, but not to point anybody out to blame. Things happen, but we've got a unity that I do appreciate. And I'm thankful and excited, as Mr. Blackstock says all the time, that Pittsylvania County's got a lot of things coming, and we're in a key position. We've got good things in place, and most of all, we've got workforce availability and readiness that's in our district, as well as the Pittsylvania County. And lastly, I would exalt you to express your right tomorrow morning from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. to vote. Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Davis. Mr. Scares?
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I want to say, I want to reiterate that, please get out and vote. If you haven't already voted, do it tomorrow. Tomorrow's an important day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scares. Mr. Blackstock?
Encourage everybody to vote, and I personally would be praying for unity of our country. Whoever's chosen as our president tomorrow will be all of our president for the next 4 years, hopefully, and I hope that our country will unite behind that person, and we will become a stronger nation for it.
Thank you, Mr. Blackstock. Mr. Hageman?
Well, I'm certainly going to vote tomorrow, so I appreciate everybody voting also. So we can't let this change get by us, no matter who wins. But anyway, I will hope to see everyone next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Hageman. Mr. Barber?
None.
Okay. Again, I want to thank Mr. Vanderhyde and our Pennsylvania County Treasurer, Mr. Shorter, for being here. I want to again thank Troop 356 for being here, and you all just got right up and did the task of leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. You're welcome to our meetings anytime, and we thank the adults whom I don't know by name, but we appreciate, I know that you all had something to do with it all. They didn't bring you, just a little. But thank you. It's just a pleasure to see young people, no matter what, coming to the meeting. So thank you. I have just a couple of things. The VACO, Virginia Association of Counties Annual Conference, being held at the Homestead in Wythe County, kicks off on the 12th through the 15th. Myself, we're down to 2 now. Myself and Mr. Davis will be attending. Just as a reminder, the RIFA meeting will be Thursday. I believe that's the 16th of November. Is that right? Is it the 16th, Mr. Bundy?
I will confirm that. Put my calendar up.
17th is a Thursday.
Mr. Chairman, I have it on my calendar for the 16th on Wednesday at noon.
Okay, so it's I had the 16th, but I said Thursday, so it's Wednesday. Okay. Chatham Elementary School will be having a Veterans Day program, relatively a short program, on November the 11th at the school. I attended last year, so don't have to be a veteran, but if we have any veterans who would like to go and see a program that will really make your heart feel good, because the kids get together and they do a little ceremony as they raise the flag at the elementary school. It's quite, it's done quite well. So if you'd like to go and see that, it's 9 o'clock on November the 11th, Chatham Elementary School. And last but not least, I shared a letter with members of the board from the Pittsylvania County Public Library. I thought it was a very nice letter to the board and worth all of us being able to see that. That's it. Mr. Hunt, nothing? Okay.
No, sir.
Nothing?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay. Thank you all for coming, ladies and gentlemen.